Oh, g'day, Gigi. Listen, thank you so much for appearing today, and it's a great honor to meet you. Um, I
It's my
represent,
pleasure, Tim. Thanks for having me.
oh God, I represent the End the Lockdown Australia group, which is essentially a grassroots movement of ordinary people who basically have reservations that we both share about the wisdom and the nuances of a lockdown policy and believe that the full costs of, in terms of societal impact and economic impact, should be applied to. So basically, they are moving on straight to the first question because I know you're a very, very busy lady. Now, start a lockdown. There was a mantra: you cannot put a price on a human life. Now, we both know there is always a finite amount of money in a health budget that has to be allocated as wisely as possible, and there are well developed mechanisms to actually show that. And we, as a practitioner, I've been doing it for 30 years. Um, when I raised these reservations amongst acquaintances, people were implying I was some kind of a psychopathic granny killer. Now, I've got to say, your interview on Q&A was great because it was what needed to be said. However, maybe you could comment about what happened after that interview and the impact it had on you.
Sure. Thanks, Tim. You're quite right that I felt that it was very obvious that this was the wrong policy direction that we were headed in and that we should simply correct. And that what had happened was that we'd been possessed by our fear of this virus, perhaps motivated by what we'd seen overseas and media messaging, and we were just panicking. And so we
Yeah,
were doing something that was just senseless. But if we just reminded ourselves that, that was not the right approach, let's
yeah,
just take a minute and breathe and take the whole situation in, as a holistic picture and then solve it, then we would realize that this was wrong. And we would go back to the, quality-based approaches, for
yeah,
example, which is what you were referencing before, and try to target the assistance where it was really needed and all the rest. But it just didn't happen. And
yeah,
it was March, I suppose, that these things sort of started to heat up here in Australia, and overseas as well. In fact, with the ICL report, which came out and triggered a lot of activity around the world by politicians, which just seemed totally panicked. But
yeah,
then I thought, well, okay, maybe that'll last for a month, But then
yeah,
even a month later, I think it was April 20th that I went on Q&A for the first time. I was on Q&A again, actually, in
yeah,
July, I think. And, and I sort of knew that I was going to be representing an unpopular opinion at the
yeah,
time, but I thought, well, all we need to do is remind people that there are trade-offs, because there are trade-offs. Now, interestingly, on the same day that I went on Q&A, actually, my professional colleagues, 200 of them, published an open letter essentially saying that there were no trade-offs, and the same basic line that you can't put a price
absolutely.
on life. We need to deal with health first before the economy, right? And this just is, again, senseless to me, because the lives versus money trade-off is a straw man. That is not actually how we approach situations in normal times. The economy and thriving and economic activity, those things support human well-being.
Yeah,
That's what we want to do. We go out and go to work and have something to do in our lives and talk with our friends. All of these things are part of a functioning economy.
yeah,
And if you stop that, then you are actually stopping the source of our society's support for human well-being. And that's the maximum end of the entire economics discipline: human well-being
yeah,
as a whole,
absolutely.
not just human well-being related to COVID. So I went on and I just thought, well, I just need to point out the trade-offs. But indeed, as you say, that there was just no hunger, or even less than that, there was no openness really to even investigating this at all and
Yeah,
thinking about anything that could be traded off. And I think it was particularly difficult because, at the time, we really didn't have a lot of costs that we could point to that were very tangible, right?
yeah,
What we had was costs overseas. We had body bags visible on the
yeah,
streets of
yeah, yeah,
Milan,
absolutely.
whatever, right? And it seemed as though to the person on the street that there was this clear cost, and then the other costs of doing the lockdowns were kind of this nebulous, vague thing. And and I had to say, in Q&A, look, it's not just the short run costs; it's also the long run costs, and it's all these invisible costs. I'm not going to be on anybody's spreadsheet, and that's a difficult argument to run when people are seeing people dying in the streets, right? And so I think that was part of it as well, was basically an inability of people to really imagine, well, understand the economic system. First of all, economics, really gives us a way to connect everybody together and get the most out of everyone, because they specialize in their areas of comparative advantage. And of course, I couldn't give an economics lesson on Q&A, but that idea that the economy is an interdependent web that creates human well-being, right? That is just not understood by the average Australian on the street, right? They think of the economy as something you can just, oh, you do that, whatever, but then you also have your life, right? And of course, economists don't think about like that at all, right? The economy is where life happens, to a large extent. Obviously, you have vacations, but even when you're on vacation, you're a consumer of products and services for the hospitality industry. So everything is really economics, and so for me, that kind of ignorance of the system, and I couldn't rely on that. My audience didn't understand it, right? So you can't use that to build your argument. So I ended up just having to say, look, there are going to be these costs, and we need to balance and trade. I just kept talking about trade-offs and opportunity costs, basically.
Oh God, yes, look, absolutely. And the thing is, public finance, etc. You said it was needed to be said, and God, it was a great decision.
I have to say, I mean, I didn't feel that bad on the program. I mean, Hamish McDonald, who was the host, was very cordial, and I mean, he invited me back again in July, and I went back on again. He was very nice. I mean, it was all fine. And on the way out, actually, of the April one, I remember I was approached by one of my co-panelists, and she said, "I think I'm actually starting to get you now." And I thought, okay, the penny's starting to drop, and again, I thought it would, happen more quickly, that we would get out of this. But it didn't. And now we have, the problems that we have now, which we'll talk about in a moment. But in terms of the reaction, my email box exploded after that appearance.
Look, I can imagine. This moves on to my second point, which is the motto of the group is lockdown is a cock-up, not a conspiracy. And as you can imagine, people were frightened. There are all kinds of bizarre theories, and basically we've had rationality, and the most plausible explanation that I've come across was by one of my old lecturers, Professor David Starkey, and he's one of the eminent historians in the UK. And his argument was that over the course of a single weekend, one, the French government threatened to close the border with the UK. Two, there was a single London hospital which was overwhelmed with COVID cases. However, having worked as an auditor for the London National Health Service, that happens every winter during the flu season. It is not a unique occurrence, sadly.
Absolutely.
And then the third thing was the Ferguson Imperial College model predicting 500,000 deaths. It hit ministers' deaths on the same day, and literally it was just a complete panic response. I've just wondered, have you, and obviously UK goes into lockdown, we follow a week later. Have you any insights yourself on the cause of this panic?
So, I mean, I have written on this topic. Why did we have this reaction? Because I'm a behavioral economist, actually. Right? That's sort of how I think of myself, how people think of me. So I've written for a couple of different outlets. And yes, I agree about the panic, the fear. I think it was spread very strongly by the media. And essentially the politicians who, even in early March, in Australia, as well as other countries, had been saying sensible things like, oh, this is, generally not that bad for most people. Watch out if you're older. I mean, they've been basically towing the line that we know has been true this whole time, right? But they could not, I think, continue to toe that line after this massive groundswell reaction amongst people. So it was really the people who created this problem by going along, being afraid, believing that the videos and the images over their own common sense,
Yeah.
and being swept away by the ICL modeling. And of course, by the way, there have been many other models done of,
Yeah.
new viruses, SARS, MERS, etc., and they've almost always gotten it wildly wrong in terms of how
Yeah.
many people die. Right?
Absolutely. Look,
So,
couldn't agree with you more. Now, a lot of my career has been spent in international development, and I have been happily walking around in countries which do have pandemics. They do have natural disasters, and they do have vast displaced people because of wars and other kinds of tragedies. And I've been
yep.
wandering around with a copy of the UK Treasury Green Book under my arm to colleagues in developing countries, literally like a missionary carrying a Bible. I will post a link to it so the viewers can have a look at it. Now, given this, I'm concerned as a finance professional who specializes in government, how can we return to rational decision making after this?
This is the biggest question. And really the biggest barrier, I feel, is the massive amount of incentives that have developed over this period of being shut down and focusing so heavily on COVID.
Yeah.
On the part of many different players, governments, industries, particular people in, high up in certain areas in the economy,
Yeah.
who really have everything now to
Yeah.
win from this thing continuing, right?
Absolutely.
They just want this to keep going on. And the media companies, Zoom, Amazon, Google, I mean, you name it, they have just cleaned up, and mom and pop businesses have gone out of business, right? And so the stock market's going through the roof because the stock market has basically been, essentially, taken over by just the big businesses rather than having anybody else. And so, people who have money are sitting pretty. People like me, I mean, I am the last person you want to be worrying about in this sort of situation, right? All recessions are regressive to a certain extent, but this one is particularly so, and particularly in relation to whether you are an established, high income, secure job kind of person. And those people, white collar workers, can just stay at home and do their Zoom calls. And they save on commuting costs, and their bank accounts grow, right?
Yeah.
And so there is massive incentive on the part of, and economics is all about incentives. On the part of those people, on the part of media companies, on the part of governments, on the part of industry creating the, the PPE and the testing equipment and the vaccines and all this sort of stuff to just keep the madness going. That's the incentive.
God, yes. Look,
and this is the problem, right? I honestly, figuring out how to reorient that Titanic is a very difficult task, and I can't give you any automatic, this is what you should do.
I agree with you completely.
But I mean, to be honest, I think it may be political, right? You may need some sort of a political pushback. That's the only.
That leads exactly. Look, like I say, I'm career public servant and consultant. However, I'm considering seriously entering the political arena, because on the premise that, for God's sake, if I don't do it, good people don't become involved, then nobody will. I wonder if you've had similar thoughts.
I've been approached, and I've had many people commenting, at least half a dozen comments about it. I mean, first of all, I'm a dual citizen, so I don't think I'm eligible.
But there are mechanisms around this. Trust me, as you can hear by my accent, there is a lot of paperwork being exchanged as we speak.
Well, I mean, I do know that some people in our camp on this have proposed this and are actually pushing forward with it independently. Sanjeev Sablok, you may know.
Sanjeev.
So. Yep. So he's trying to start a political movement, and the issue really with politics. First of all, you'd be a pebble in an avalanche, right? And you just hope there are enough other pebbles to actually make the avalanche, and if not, it's really, you're just a pebble, and there goes your life, right?
Yeah.
And
I don't like to say, look, just to cut you off, and I do apologize. Look, I'm in exactly the same position. I quite enjoyed being an accountant. However, I have recently formally affiliated as a volunteer with the Liberal Democrat Party, purely because I see that as the sole viable party between, you've got the ALP and the LNP, and I don't believe that they are representing the best interests of the people. And I'm literally, so I'm declaring that up front. And look, I'm just moving on to the next question. Modern monetary theory is being touted as some kind of a panacea and the professor in Newcastle University. I heard him speak. Now, to me, it sounds like the economics of the Weimar Republic and Bob Mugabe in Zimbabwe. I'm an accountant. I am not an economist. You guys are the architects. We're the builders when it comes to financial policy. Am I right to have those concerns?
So the first thing I'll say is that modern monetary theory is an obvious go-to explanation to excuse the massive outpourings of government assistance that have been done in this country. And so you would expect that it's going to get a lot of play in this period because everybody's looking for a rationalization for why this is okay, right? That's point one. Point two, I don't think it's without merit entirely to make the argument that a government that enjoys strong trust of people is not like a family or household finance kind of situation, in the sense that you don't have to have income and expenditure equate all the time, right? So in a family, you get into debt and then you have to eventually pay it off, or else your children have to pay it off, and blah blah. And with a country, if you have enough confidence in your currency, in your sovereign power to eventually pay off debt, whatever, then you can actually use that to, have outlays in sessions, which are a lot greater than the intake, taxes.
For sure.
And so there's no real requirement, and it's not like there's one bank account.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So right, so that part of it is fair enough, right? But the problem is, of course, that both of the examples you gave, in fact, Mugabe, Zimbabwe, and the Weimar Republic, as well as many examples from other places, including the South American countries, which are the most famous, did not enjoy that sort of trust, right? And that was the thing ultimately that caused the downfall of the ability of those governments to continue to just print money. And so the fear is that Australia or another sovereign country which enjoys trust now will just basically, piss that away, essentially. Right?
And you can see it in the downgrading of state government credit ratings, etc., etc. And
that's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to inform our viewers, the main reason is that sovereign governments can always borrow money cheaply than anybody else, because there's no repayment risk, because they have the capacity to print money. So if you buy a treasury bond for $1 million, you're going to get $1 million. The only risk is the inflation risk, whereas a bank might go bankrupt. So that's, listen, thank you so much for today. If I can take 3 points away, which are: 1, thank you, you've represented the people. 2, I'm encouraging our members to become engaged in the political process, because good people of goodwill, responsible people, need to take a leadership position. And thirdly, that this modern monetary theory is not a magic wand which is going to fix the problems of the universe. So listen, thank you so much for your time, Gigi.
Cheers. My pleasure. Thanks for having me again.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.